Hey everyone, welcome to the Dyl Pickle Movie Network. I am Dylan Randazzo, and welcome to my final review for my New York Film Festival 62 coverage. Now, a lot of you are saying, Dylan, that festival wrapped 2 months ago. I know, I didn't realize when I was taking on this project that I was going to end up seeing as many films as I did. I'm very grateful for that, but also realizing that with all the other things going on in my life and happening in the midst of spooky season and holiday season, it was going to take me a while to review all these films, especially films as gargantuan as The Brutalist, the newest film by Brady Corbet, the film we'll be talking about today. Listen, this film had so many expectations. It had so many pedestals that it was being placed upon. It was being called the next Godfather, the next There Will Be Blood. And my review here isn't going to be saying, how dare people say that? But it's also going to be kind of a warning to let people know that it is a very different film than The Godfather. It's a very different film than There Will Be Blood. It has a similar feel in the fact that it is big, long, dense, dramatic, epic, and it leaves you lingering with so many thoughts and feelings, and it feels monumental. But I think that's where the conversation ends in terms of comparisons, because there are so many different character developments in this thing. There's so many different relationships, so much different nuance. The way it's shot is a little bit differently than those other films, but I do think, it is exciting that people have a film that they can call like the next Godfather and There Will Be Blood. I'm not quite there with it. Those films are very near and dear to me. There are films that I consider some of the best of the medium at large, and I don't consider The Brutalist that quite yet. But I do think this is one of those films that with time could kind of fully reach that status if I give a little more time to it, if I dissect it a little bit further, if I dig a little deeper. Now, the problem with New York Film Festival is that it's one screening and you can't go to the next screening because all of them are sold out. So like you don't have the time to revisit the film another time or two before making a review, which is a burden for me because I would love to sit with this film 2, 3, 4 more times before I'm reviewing it. But just kind of as a basic primer, I guess I should tell you what it's about. It's about an immigrant. Adrien Brody plays him, Laszlo Toth, who comes, he is a Holocaust survivor. He comes to America, and it's about him trying to make his way as an architect in America. And he kind of strikes this big deal with this big rich client played by Guy Pearce, his son Joe Alwyn, or his son played by Joe Alwyn, I should say. Joe Alwyn isn't actually Guy Pearce's son. I don't know why I said that, but he plays Guy Pearce's son in the film, and he basically hires him for this project, and you start to see how this really interesting relationship develops between this wealthy man and this immigrant, and then when he is able to get his wife to the States, how that changes a lot of the dynamic and a lot of the social different classes and just the interactions between different characters in this space. It is a much different film than I expected. I mean, it is in the title. It is a brutal watch, not in the sense that like, ugh, this is still going on, this is brutal. No, but more so in the fact that it is dense, it is dark, it is dramatic. There isn't a lot of comedy, and when it does have comedy, it almost feels a little unwelcome and a little weird because you don't feel like you should be laughing in these moments. I mean, these characters have so much life to them, which I really appreciate. I mean, Guy Pearce, he's a big, broad performer in this thing. He kind of talks like he's an old Hollywood guy. And even Adrien Brody, he's putting on this big accent and he's kind of giving this really meaty Oscar performance. Now, it's still nuanced, it's still raw, it's still fresh, it's still honest, but it also has this kind of broad, classic Hollywood feel that I think, lends itself to the comparisons to There Will Be Blood and The Godfather. I don't think those comparisons are one and the same. Obviously, those are so different movies, but when we think about those movies, we also think about the performers behind them. And I think a big reason why The Brutalist is so good and why a lot of people are taking to it so positively is because of Adrien Brody. And I said it the second I left the theater, I think he's going to sweep award season. I think he's going to win Globe. I think he's going to win Critics' Choice. I think he's going to win BAFTA. I think he's going to win SAG. And I think he's going to win the Oscar. That is my prediction. Obviously, I might be wrong because there are so many good contenders this year. Coleman Domingo and Sing Sing, Ralph Fiennes in Conclave, Timothée Chalamet is supposedly really good in A Complete Unknown. I haven't seen that yet, but I do think just based on this performance, it's one of those undeniable things, not only just because it's great, but also because it has to be sustained for 3.5 hours. There's a lot of alienating thoughts about the runtime. And I want to say first and foremost, the runtime, at least in the first half, breezes by. And I think that's an effect of the film. It's supposed to show this American dream and the positives and the growth and the things you can achieve with the American dream in the first half. And then the second half is kind of watching it all crumble. And I think that second half, up until the intermission, there is an intermission in this thing. Up until the intermission, I was like, wow, this is breezing on by. And that second half does take its time to where by the end of the second half, I did feel the length. So I think this is one of those very interesting experiments where the first half of the film, you barely feel the length, and the second half, you definitely do. But I think overall, like, I don't think people are going to be sitting in their chairs ready to go, like, ugh, this is still going on. Like, I think it's so well paced to where I really appreciated the fact that it took the whole 3.5 hours, 4 hours, whatever, to tell such a engrossing full story. I felt like there was no thread left untied, and the ones that were very purposeful and intentional in telling the messages and themes that this film wanted to convey. It didn't feel like we were shortchanged with any character development, any plot beats, any big production design moments, because this is about architecture. So there's so many grand, sweeping, beautiful visuals of big buildings and monuments and museums and these giant set pieces. But yeah, like I felt like, yes, it was a very long run time, but I felt like it was so well used. And even then, like, I feel like it still left things hanging in a very profound way at the end that didn't feel like we needed more time to flesh out, but just made sense for the story. So I just really want to commend the editing and the pacing for this thing, because I did see the runtime, and like everyone else, before you see it, it's daunting. You don't want to be sitting there feeling like you're just waiting for time to end and time to pass and checking your watch. And this is not that film. And I know a lot of people are going to be nervous about checking this out because of that. But I will say right now, another reason why I really want to hammer home the fact that the runtime is not a big problem is because I think this is also a necessary watch in a theater. And I think that also elevated my experience. I got to watch this in 70 millimeter projection. It was freaking gorgeous. And I know this is going to be projected in 70 millimeter. I think it's going to be in some IMAX theaters as well. And this is one of those films, just because of its nature, not just because it's about big landscapes and architecture and buildings and big production design. That's one reason to see it in IMAX or in the biggest screen possible. But another reason is also because of just the classic kind of texture of the camera work. It does have this grain to it that you see in like older classic films like The Godfather. There's also big performances in this thing that deserve to be absorbed in a very full way. And I think just the nature of the story, it is so dense, it is so epic, it is so dramatic, it is so full of so much different stuff. Like, these are terrible words to use in a review. I'm getting docked so many critic points, but it is just so much stuff that you just want to absorb it in the most rich and raw way possible. And I think that is in a theater, just letting it wash over you, because it is one of those films that does that. It just washes over you. And at the end, there are going to be people who hate the ending. There are going to be people who don't necessarily get the ending. There are going to be people who feel a little underwhelmed by the second half in general, because it does take a much darker, dramatic route. But I just think there's so much to think about in this film that I think just being in that theater with all the lights turned off, with no distractions, just focused on that screen, I think that is the most rewarding way to watch The Brutalist. And I know that runtime is daunting. A lot of people are going to be nervous, but as I said, there's also an intermission. So you have that opportunity to get up, walk around for 15 minutes. And I think because the film is so powerful, that whole 15 minutes, while yes, it was an intermission, while my immersion was broken, I was still left thinking about the first half so much that it never felt like I was fully taken out of the world. And I think that's another criticism, and a lot of reason why people don't want to put intermissions in their movies is because they don't want to break the immersion. It's the same as like people who don't like people being on their phones or people going to the bathroom during a movie or talking during a movie. I don't like that stuff. I will not go to the bathroom during a movie unless given an intermission. I also will not tolerate talking during my movie. I also hate when people are on their cell phones during a movie. For me, that breaks my immersion. But I think for this film, a lot of people think, intermissions break your immersion. But I think when a film is so successful as this, and when the intermission is perfectly placed and timed out, it can really create a great effect to where the whole intermission, 15 minutes, flew by because I kept thinking about the first half and I was thinking about what was being set up in the second half. I mean, I think about my time seeing 2001: A Space Odyssey on the big screen, and I love the intermission there. They put the intermission right after Hal kind of picks up the lip readings where they're kind of plotting against Hal, and that's where they kind of put their beat, put their intermission. And I think intermissions are so cool because it allows the audience to understand that this is a pivotal point in the story. And I think they're not just there to serve as bathroom breaks, but they're there to serve a narrative purpose. And in this sense, I really like the way the intermission is placed. Again, like I said, because the first half builds to something so great, and then the second half kind of crashes and crumbles it down. I love where the intermission falls here because it does feel like it's a natural place of reflection. It is a real inflection point as well. And I love just what it sets up for the second half of the movie. And I love the shot of the intermission. They keep a single photograph on screen for all of intermission. I'm sure if you've been on Twitter, you've seen that photo. But yeah, I really really like the way the intermission was placed. I love the way it was paced. It is a dense film, so it's hard to talk about all its themes. I mean, it is the American dream in all its glory and it's all its darkness, all its poison, all its toxicity. And I think that is a very clear message. I don't think this movie is subtle in that way. I think it kind of hits you over the head with it, but I do think it is just so impactful. And I think it's because it's so well written, because these characters are so well fleshed out. Felicity Jones doesn't even show up till halfway through the film. She is only in the second half, yet her impact is so felt. Like I left the film thinking about her more than most of the other roles in the film aside from Adrien Brody. And like I said, Adrien Brody is just doing something that very few actors are able to achieve. Just a tour de force performance for as long as he's doing it, as consistently as he's doing it. I mean, he's an actor that I feel like when he really hits, it is marvelous to watch. But I also feel like he's someone who doesn't work as often as other actors do. And I think it's because he really picks projects that mean a lot to him. And you could tell this project definitely did. You know, being an immigrant story, being a story about a Jewish man, also being a story about a husband and wife relationship in the midst of this kind of changing tones and kind of anti-Semitism, but also this idea of class and different, structures based on wealth. And also, this kind of battle between wealth and this kind of power dynamic between Guy Pearce's character. Now, Guy Pearce obviously is also becoming a Best Supporting Actor contender for his role, as he should, but I think his role is very much fulfilling one purpose. I think in the second half of the film, there are a few interesting pivots with his character, but he is mostly there to be this antagonistic force, whereas I think Adrien Brody and even Felicity Jones take just so many interesting kind of routes with their characters and kind of, obstacle courses of emotions, if you will. So I really like The Brutalist. Again, it's hard to talk about each and everything because there's just so much to talk about, but I wanted to talk most of all about the runtime, the pacing, the intermission, and of course the performances, which I think is kind of the reason why I would recommend this to someone. Though I understand it's hard to get 4 hours to go to a theater to see this, especially if your theaters aren't showing it, which I really hope they are come Christmas time. But this movie's great. It's not one of my best of the year because it's so much to take in that I need to watch it another few times to really understand it fully 100% of the way through. I think I'm like 90% there with it. There are just certain moments and beats that I wish I could rewatch just to fully flesh it out because it is so much. But also production design. I know I talked about it, but it's all about architecture, and the architecture in this film is just gorgeous. Just the different buildings and structures you see. I mean, the whole film kind of centers around the building of one single structure, and just seeing that kind of find its way from start to finish and just develop before our eyes. It's spectacular. My voice is starting to tire out because I've just been talking about this movie now for 2 months, and I just still don't think I have enough words to describe it. It is just a monumental event, as many people have been saying. Is it There Will Be Blood? Is it The Godfather? I don't think so. I don't think it's quite there. But for what it is just spectacular. And this is my first Brady Corbet film. I've never seen Vox Lux. I really want to check it out now. But I think if you've never seen his work, I think this could also just be a cool kind of eye-opening to a breakthrough director. I know he's already broken through, but for me, he was a breakthrough director. I'd never seen his work before, so it was just really special. So there's my review for The Brutalist. If you've seen it already, let me know in the comments below what you thought of it. And if you haven't, please check it out. If you can in a theater, like I said, don't be scared by the runtime. The runtime, especially in that first half, just flies by, and I think it makes great use of that runtime. And you will have 15 minutes to pee, to check your phone, to get some snacks. Like, you will have that intermission, which I think is so important and integral. And I hope more people kind of adopt that, because it doesn't just allow you a second to pee, but it also gives you a really cool device to use in the storytelling to tell you this is where we've hit our peak, our climax. Now watch what happens next. It's like a great TV break. And I hate to compare film to TV in this sense because they're so different in mediums, but it really does feel like that kind of cliffhanger to be continued. But the good news is you get it 15 minutes later as opposed to a year or 2 years or a season later. But that's enough for The Brutalist. I've talked enough. That's enough New York Film Fest 62 coverage. I will be doing a quick ranking soon, sometime on this channel of all the films I saw in New York Film Festival 62. But they're all my reviews. You can go check them out. They're all backlogged. I'll put them in a playlist up here for New York Film Fest 62, so you can check those out. And of course, stay tuned for more. I will be giving you my first wave of post-festival Oscar predictions. A lot has changed since the last time I made a festival prediction, so I will be back just giving my full thoughts on just where I think the Oscar race is, especially with us getting Golden Globe nominations tomorrow. So stay tuned for that. Otherwise, thank you so much for watching. Like, subscribe, and comment. It helps us grow, and we are very appreciative of it here at the Dyl Pickle Movie Network. Stay tuned for more. Thanks so much, and have a great Sunday.